Chapter 16. Lessons in the Dark. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. Winterfell, the North. Close your eyes, Luke said, voice pitched low enough that Sansa had to strain to hear. Feel the world around you, Luke said, his voice carrying that particular resonance that made the air itself seem to listen. The Force connects everything. The earth beneath you, the leaves above, even the spaces between heartbeats. Arya shifted on her own patch of ground, leather creaking. Through slitted lids, Sansa caught her sister's fingers twitching toward where Needle would rest, always restless when asked to be still. The Force hummed between them, though prickled would be a better description seeing their habit of bickering, even in the Force. Feel the currents beneath words, Luke instructed, his voice carrying the patient cadence of 100 lessons taught. Truth has weight. Lies flutter like. The Force wailed. Luke's hand shot to his temple as Jon's rage slammed into him, feeling the crimson wave of betrayal and anguish so raw at him struggle to stay upright. Sansa's eyes snapped open, pupils dilating as she caught the edge of it. Master Luke! But he was already moving, and through their Force bond, he felt Jon's presence like a wound in the Force, burning, bleeding, transforming. And beneath it, Ned's emotions. A gray shroud of guilt so heavy it threatened to drag them both under. Stay here, Luke commanded, not slowing. Mediate on my words. The Godswood entrance loomed ahead with 2 bewildered guards. Luke rounded the carved archway and nearly collided with Lord Stark, who slumped against the outer wall like a man who'd taken a mortal blow. His face looked as if he had just woken from carbonite freezing, and his hands shook like autumn leaves. Lord Stark. Luke crouched beside him, one hand on the man's shoulder. Through the contact, waves of anguish crashed over him. Regret, fear, and underneath it all, a father's desperate love twisted into knots. What happened? Ned's gray eyes focused slowly, as if returning from some distant battlefield. I told him, the words scraped out raw. About his mother. Luke's jaw tightened. He'd urged this conversation, knowing the truth would surface eventually. But the timing, his reaction? Fire. Ned's voice cracked on the word. He summoned fire from nothing. Luke. The leaves burned, the grass, and for a moment his eyes, a shudder ran through the Lord of Winterfell. They turned a molten gold, like a wolf's in a deep winter night. And the way Jon looked at me, is this what it means to be a Jedi? Dread flooded in Luke's veins. Yellow eyes, the mark of dark side corruption, of anger given form and substance. That's not what it means to be a Jedi. Luke's voice carried the weight of lessons learned in blood and failure. What you saw, Jon's fire, his eyes. That's raw emotion given form. The Force responding to pain. Ned's hands still trembled against the stone. You speak as if this is normal. Not normal. Natural. Luke crouched lower, feeling the cold seep through his knees where they pressed against Winterfell's ancient stones. The Godswood's burnt smell still clung to the air, a reminder that Luke had an apprentice to now fear for. The Force doesn't distinguish between joy and rage. It simply amplifies what's already there. And the yellow eyes? Ned's voice barely rose above a whisper. Luke's chest tightened. No easy answer for that. A warning. When we channel the Force through anger, through hate, it marks us, changes us. But one moment doesn't define a lifetime. He thought of his father's redemption, bought with a final act of love. I've seen men return from far darker places than where Jon stands now. He'd seen it in his father, in the Emperor, in every Sith who'd surrendered to rage. But in Jon, so young, so unprepared for this burden? Eddard finally looked up, and Luke saw father's grief etched in every line. How do I reach him? What words could possibly comfort my boy? Words. Luke shook his head. Lord Stark, your nephew just discovered his entire identity is built on necessary lies. Words are a fool's gambit right now. He stood, already reaching out through the Force to track Jon's blazing presence. Eddard's hand stilled on the Godswood gate. Something shifted in his posture, his shoulders drawing back, chin lifting with the careful precision of a man who just glimpsed a wolf in sheep's clothing. You knew. Not a question. The words dropped between them like stones into still water. Suspected. Luke met those gray eyes without flinching. The Force shows patterns. A boy who is never called son by the father who loves him. A father whose grief runs deeper than shame. The way you flinch whenever someone mentions your sister. Luke let each observation hang in the cold air. You confirmed what the Force had already whispered. Ned's jaw worked silently. His fingers flexed against the gate's iron bars, knuckles white. Suspected. Ned's laugh scraped raw in his throat. Only here for a few moons and you already unraveled my greatest secret that I've kept hidden for 15 years. He turned away, pressing his forehead against the cold stone wall. Did he suspect? Before tonight, did he? No. Luke stepped closer, lowering his voice. Lord Stark, I've kept many secrets. This one was yours to reveal. Or hide forever. The words came muffled against stone. Perhaps that would have been kinder because now. Ned pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I've lost him, haven't I? My sister's son, and I've driven him to... No. Luke's voice carried the certainty of hard-won experience. Anger is human. Even manifestation through the Force, it happens. What matters is what comes next. He reached out through the Force, following the familiar signature of Jon's presence. There, moving through the castle like a storm barely contained, leaving ripples of distress in his wake. Servants pressing against walls, guards stepping aside without knowing why. The boy blazed in the Force like a torch, all that careful control shattered. But not lost. Not yet. I'll find him, Luke promised, rising. Give him time to process. Then approach him with an open mind. Time. Ned's laugh held no humor. How much time does one need to accept their entire life was built on lies? Luke thought of his own moment of revelation, of Vader's mechanical breathing, the truth falling like a hammer blow. More than you'd think. Less than you'd hope. He left Lord Stark there, knowing the man needed his own time to wrestle with choices made in love and fear. The Force pulled Luke through Winterfell's ancient halls, Ghost and Amidala leading him down worn stone steps that descended into darkness. The crypts, of course. Luke paused at the entrance, extending his senses. Jon's presence pulsed below as a wound in the Force, raw and bleeding emotion, but stable. The initial wildfire of rage had banked to something colder, more dangerous. Calculation replacing chaos. Just a few words, Luke reminded himself, no more than that. The boy, no, the young man, needed space to breathe, to think, to choose who he would become in light of this revelation. Too soon, and Luke would be another adult forcing decisions. Too late, and the dark side would sink its hooks deep. Jon's footsteps echoed through the crypts like hammer blows on cold iron, each one driving deeper the truth he couldn't escape. The stone stairs descended into darkness, and he welcomed it. The darkness couldn't judge, couldn't lie, couldn't pretend he was something he wasn't. Demon, named after two men who left the world scarred, a villain in Targaryen history, and the other the sin that haunts every bastard. Demon, Demon Snow, Demon Sand, the name was a thorn pricking at his conscience. All those years of being Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, and now... What? The bastard of a dead prince who'd started a war for lust? His torch flickered against ancient stone, casting dancing shadows across the faces of dead Starks. They watched him pass with granite eyes, both hostile and welcoming. Brandon, Ricard, generations of lords who'd never hidden behind lies. The cold seeped through his cloak, but it felt distant compared to the ice in his chest. There, at the end of the row, Lyanna Stark statue stood smaller than the lords around her, as if even in death she remained the wild girl who'd ridden like the wind. Jon approached slowly, his breath misting in the crypt's chill. The sculptor had captured something in her face, a fierceness, a sadness, cold, unfeeling stone eyes that somehow mirrored his pain. Mother! The word scraped raw from his throat. He'd never said it aloud before, not to anyone real. Only to phantoms in his dreams where a highborn lady forced to give up her bastard. A common woman who'd died birthing him. A whore who'd warmed Lord Stark's bed one night. All my dreams, and the truth is worse. Ghost pressed his head against Jon's thigh, the direwolf's warmth seeping through leather and wool. The albino's red eyes caught the dying torchlight, reflecting it back like drops of blood. His rough tongue rasped once across Jon's knuckles where they'd clenched white against his knees. His legs gave out. Jon sank to his knees before her tomb, the torch clattering from nerveless fingers. It rolled away, flames guttering but not dying, casting her face in shifting light and shadow. I used to imagine you, he whispered to the stone. Sometimes you were beautiful, sometimes plain. Sometimes you loved me enough to die for me. Sometimes you hated what you'd made. His voice cracked. But you were always mine. My mother. The stone gave no answer. Lyanna Stark had kept her secrets to the grave. And now I find you were a Stark all along. That I knelt in the God's Wood beside my cousins, not my brothers and sisters. That every time Lady Stark looked at me with those cold eyes, she was right. I didn't belong. Not the way I thought. Soft footfalls echoed from the stairs. 2 sets of paws padded through the darkness as Amidala's grounded presence washed over him. Jon didn't turn. He couldn't look away from her face. The footsteps stopped beside him. Master Luke said nothing, just stood there while Amidala's white form settled next to Ghost. The dire wolves touched noses briefly, a greeting between pack, then turned their attention to Jon. He felt Ghost's concern through their bond. A wordless question. I don't know, Jon thought back. I don't know anything anymore. They stood in silence, man and boy, before the tomb of Lyanna Stark. The torch flickered between them, painting their shadows large on the crypt walls. Jon's throat worked, but no words came. What was there to say? That he'd spent his life dreaming of a mother who'd loved him, only to find she'd died bearing the seed of the man who'd destroyed everything? I had all these dreams. The words finally spilled out, bitter as northern wind. I thought the worst would be if she was some common whore Fa Lord Stark had forgotten. Some tavern wench who'd meant nothing. He laughed, and it echoed off stone like breaking glass. But this is worse than anything I imagined. Luke remained silent, patient, like the stones around them. Jon pushed himself to his feet, turning to face the man who'd taught him to touch powers he didn't understand. My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen, the dragon prince who started a war, who abandoned his wife and children. The words choked off. And Uncle Ned lied. Every day of my life he lied. Rhaegar Targaryen's son. The words almost refusing to leave his mouth. Born of, what? Rape? Love? Does it matter? She died either way. Died birthing the dragon's bastard while her brother. His voice broke entirely. I'm sorry. Luke's voice carried weight Jon had never heard before. For the loss of your mother, your father, for the life of lies you've had to live. Jon scoffed, anger flaring hot in his chest. Sorry? You're sorry? How could you be sorry if you don't understand? He stopped, seeing something in Luke's eyes. Pain. Old and deep as winter. What is it, master? A sad smile touched Luke's lips. I understand you more than you might think. Your story, it's not so different from mine. How could that possibly be? The words came out harsher than Jon intended, but he didn't take them back. His whole life had just shattered. How could he understand? Luke moved to sit on the dirty stone floor leaning on the wall, gesturing for Jon to join him. After a moment's hesitation, Jon did. The cold seeped through his breeches immediately, but he welcomed the discomfort. Felt real. I was raised by my uncle and aunt. Luke began, his voice quiet in the tomb's hush. Moisture farmers on in the desert. They loved me, Luke said quietly, his thumb tracing absent patterns on Amidala's white fur. Owen and Beru Lars. My uncle would grumble about the equipment breaking down, about me daydreaming instead of working. But he'd ruffle my hair when he thought I wasn't looking. Taught me to fix things with my hands, not just the force. His voice caught just slightly. Jon watched the older man's throat work. My aunt would save blue milk for special occasions. Made these terrible dust cakes that were hard as rocks, but she'd beam when I ate them anyway. Luke's smile was a fragile thing. She'd patch my tunics when I tore them racing through Beggar's Canyon. Worried herself sick every time I disappeared into the wastes. The direwolf shifted, pressing her massive head against Luke's shoulder. He leaned into the comfort. They died protecting me. The Empire came looking, and they... His fingers stilled in the white fur. I found them outside our homestead, burned. The smell of... He stopped, jaw tight. I can still smell it sometimes. Charred moisture farming equipment mixed with... Jon's anger cracked, something else bleeding through. He knew that particular silence. The things you couldn't say. They weren't my blood, Luke continued, voice rough. But they raised me, fed me, loved me, and they died because of my father. Jon found himself leaning forward despite his anger. Who was he really? His name was Anakin Skywalker. He'd been... Luke searched for words. He was a Jedi Knight, but in your terms, he'd been like a Kingsguard, except he served a council and not one man. Young, brilliant, powerful in the Force. Then why did he? Because he fell. Luke's voice dropped lower. My father has a great fear of loss after the death of his mother that drove him to grasp for control, Luke said, his voice low. How love twisted into possession. The very strength that made him exceptional also made him vulnerable to corruption. Jon watched Luke clench his fist, knuckles whitening. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, my mother. Started having visions of her death. Luke's jaw worked, muscle jumping beneath scarred skin. So he made bargains. Traded pieces of himself for promises of power, for the ability to save her. Each compromise seemed small, justified. Until he became the very thing that killed her. Jon finished. The words came tumbling out without thought. Luke's head snapped up, eyes sharp. Yes, his fear manifested her death. His desperate need to control fate ensured it would come to pass. A bitter laugh escaped him. The Force has a cruel sense of irony, and he became a changed man. The crypt air seemed to thicken, pressing against Jon's chest. He could taste the dampness on his tongue, feel the cold seeping through his gloves where his hands pressed against stone. Jon's chest tightened. Changed how? The dark side of the Force consumed him. He took a new name, Darth Vader. He hunted down his former brothers, killed children in their temple, destroyed entire civilizations. Luke's eyes found Jon's, and in them Jon saw an echo of his own pain. The hero of the Republic became its greatest monster. The crypt seemed to grow colder. Jon's breath misted between them as he struggled to process this. And they hid you. My master, Obi-Wan, took me to my uncle, told them just enough to keep me safe. Let me grow up believing I was the orphaned son of a nobody, because the truth— Luke shook his head. The truth would have meant death. The Emperor would have hunted me down, or worse, turned me into what my father had become. But you learned eventually. I did, and like you, I burned with it. The betrayal, the lies, the rage at everyone who'd hidden it from me. Luke's hand found Jon's shoulder, warm through the wool. I understand that fire, Jon. I understand wanting to make them all pay for their deceptions. Jon jerked away. It's not the same. Your uncle wasn't. Lord Stark raised me as a bastard. Let his wife hate me. Let everyone think. The words tumbled over each other. Do you know what it's like? To grow up wondering why your father won't speak of your mother? To see the shame in his eyes every time someone calls you bastard? No, Luke said simply. I don't. Your pain is your own. But I know what it's like to discover everything you believed about yourself was built on lies meant to protect you. I know the darkness that calls when that happens. Jon's hands clenched into fists. He could still feel it, that surge of power when he'd faced Lord Stark. Uncle Ned. The fire that had danced at his fingertips, born of pure rage. Today, in the Godswood, Luke continued. You touched the dark side, fed it with your anger. I won't lie to you, Jon. It felt good, didn't it? That power, that certainty. Yes, the admission burned, but Jon couldn't deny it. For a moment, everything made sense. I could make them understand. Make them pay for loving you enough to lie for you? The words hit like a physical blow. Jon surged to his feet, ghost rising with him. He let me live a life of lies. He let you live. Luke remained seated, calm in the face of Jon's rage. Think, Jon. What would Robert Baratheon have done if he'd known Rhaegar Targaryen had a son? What would he have done to the boy whose father supposedly kidnapped and raped Lyanna Stark? The fight drained out of Jon as quickly as it had come. He knew. Everyone knew what Robert did to the Targaryen children. The broken bodies presented to the throne. Babes murdered in their beds. He protected you the only way he could, Luke said softly. Claimed you as his own shame rather than let you die for your father's sins. It cost him his honor, his wife's trust, but he did it anyway. Because he loved his sister. Because he loved you. Jon sank back onto the floor, suddenly exhausted. The torch had burned low, casting longer shadows. In the darkness, Lyanna's statue seemed to watch them with knowing eyes. The dark side promises simple answers, Luke said after a long moment. It says, they hurt you, so hurt them back. They lied, so make them suffer for it. It feeds on our pain, our fear, our anger, and gives us power in return. But that power hollows you out, makes you into something you're not. Like your father, like my father, like the Emperor, like every Sith who ever lived. Luke's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. They all started somewhere, a moment of pain, a choice to embrace anger instead of understanding. A step into darkness that seemed justified at the time. John thought of that moment in the Godswood. The fire at his fingertips. The way Uncle Ned had looked at him not with shame or disappointment, but with fear. Fear of what John might become. I felt it calling, he admitted quietly. When he told me, when I understood. It whispered that I could make things right. That I had the power to burn it all down. Luke nodded. I know. I've heard those whispers too. They sat in silence for a time, the crypts pressing close around them. Ghost padded over to rest his great head on John's knee, so John buried his fingers in the thick fur, drawing comfort from the familiar presence. What do I do now? The question came out small, lost. I don't know who I am anymore. Jon Snow was a lie. Daemon Targaryen is just a name. I'm nothing. You're not nothing. Luke's voice held firm certainty. You're a young man who just learned a hard truth. You're someone with a gift, a connection to the Force that could help save this realm from the darkness coming. You're still the same person who gave his sister a sword, who promised his little brother he'd come back, the one to rush out to defend the innocents. But names don't define us, Jon. Our choices do. Luke stood, offering his hand. Right now you have a choice. Let this anger consume you, follow it into darkness, or learn to release it, transform it into something better. Jon stared at the offered hand. Part of him wanted to refuse, to stay here in the dark with his mother's statue and his rage. But Ghost nudged his leg, a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone. Had never been alone, even when he'd thought himself a motherless bastard. He took Luke's hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. How? He asked simply. Luke guided him to sit again, this time cross-legged on the cold stone floor. Close your eyes. Breathe. Feel your anger, but don't fight it, don't feed it. Just observe it. Jon did as instructed, though his jaw clenched with the effort. The rage sat in his chest like a hot coal, burning. Now, Luke's voice came soft as snowfall. Imagine that anger as fire. See it clearly. Then, let it go. Release it into the Force. Not in destruction, but in understanding. Your uncle lied to protect you. Your mother died loving you enough to make him promise. Your father was a man who made choices, good and bad. They're gone. But you remain. It was harder than any sword form, any physical training. The anger wanted to stay, to fester, to grow. But slowly, breath by breath, Jon let it flow out of him. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but transformed. The fire cooled to embers, then to ash, then to nothing. When he opened his eyes, the crypt seemed less dark. Lyanna's statue watched with the same stone eyes, but now he saw the girl she'd been. Young, afraid, dying far from home with only her brother to hear her last words. Better? Luke asked. Different. Jon rose, legs stiff from the cold stone. I still don't know who I am. Then you're ahead of most people. They think they know and never question it. Luke retrieved the guttering torch, its light barely enough to guide them back. Get some rest. We leave for Old Town at dawn, and the journey's more perilous now. Why more perilous? Because your enemies have multiplied. So that means my enemies have multiplied as well. The anger had drained from Jon like water through cupped hands, leaving behind a hollow clarity. In its wake, fragments of Luke's words echoed through his mind. Strange words that had slipped past him in the heat of revelation. Master, Jon said, his voice rough from the crypt's chill. What's an empire? The older man's stride faltered for half a heartbeat. Ghost's ears pricked forward, sensing the shift in tension. And blue milk? Jon pressed, the questions tumbling out now that the fog of rage had lifted. You spoke of entire civilizations destroyed, of an emperor. He stopped walking, forcing Luke to turn back. Those aren't tales from anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms. Not from Essos either, if the maps speak true. Luke's weathered face went carefully neutral, the same expression Robb wore when caught raiding the kitchens. You're observant, Luke said finally, even in your anger. I taught myself to listen. The bitterness crept back, but Jon pushed it down. Where are you from? Amidala circled back to Luke's side, her massive head level with his chest. His teacher's gloved hand found her fur, fingers working through the thick white coat as he considered his answer. That's... Luke exhaled slowly, breath misting in the cold air. It's not a simple answer, Jon. Try me. I will. I promise. Luke's blue eyes held that same earnest intensity they'd carried in the crypt. Your family deserves to know. But it needs to be gradual, careful. John's hand tightened. More secrets. Not secrets. Just. Luke's mouth quirked in a tired smile. You've had enough world-shattering revelations for one day, don't you think? Learning your entire life is built on lies. That you're the heir to a dynasty that conquered the continent. He shook his head. Let's save the rest for when you're not contemplating burning down kingdoms. Despite himself, John felt his lips twitch. Fair enough. They resumed walking, boots echoing on stone. Ghost padded ahead, occasionally glancing back as if checking they still followed. Though I am curious, John ventured as they turned toward the guest quarters. What exactly is blue milk? Luke's laugh was genuine, warming the cold corridor. Something I miss terribly, along with decent CF and... He caught himself, shaking his head. See? Already saying too much. CAF. Perhaps on the road to Old Town. Luke paused at his chamber door. Get some rest. Dawn comes early, and we've a long journey ahead. John nodded but didn't move. Master. Yes. Whatever strange land you hail from, whatever impossible things you've seen. John met his gaze steadily. Thank you for telling me the truth. Luke's expression softened. Truth is rarely kind, but it's necessary. Luke's smile turned cryptic. Rest well, John. Or should I say, demon. John, he said firmly. Just John. Very well. The door closed with a soft thud, leaving John alone in the corridor with Ghost. The direwolf pressed against his leg, a warm weight in the castle's chill as John looked back once at the crypt entrance. Somewhere below, his mother kept her stone vigil. Lyanna Stark, who died to give him life. I'll make it mean something, he whispered to the darkness. I promise. Come on, boy, John murmured, heading for his own chambers. Let's see what dreams await a bastard prince. Behind them, winter wind howled through the stones of Winterfell, carrying whispers of the storm to come. Chapter 17. The Cost of Noble Lies. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. Winterfell, the North. Catelyn watched Winterfell's courtyard from the covered bridge connecting the Great Keep to the armory. Below, servants bustled about their duties, guards made their rounds, and life appeared ordinary. But something had shifted in her home, something almost imperceptible yet undeniable. The bastard had been avoiding her gaze at meals. That alone wasn't unusual. Jon Snow had long learned to make himself scarce in her presence. But now Ned avoided her eyes as well, wearing the same troubled expression he'd worn after returning from the rebellion with another woman's child. Her fingers tightened on the rough stone of the balustrade. A door slammed below, drawing her attention. Jon Snow crossed the yard with his wolf at his heels, his dark curls whipping in the wind. He moved with newfound purpose, his shoulders set in a way that reminded her of... Catelyn froze, her breath catching. Not of Ned, of Brandon. The realization struck her like a physical blow. How had she never seen it before? The boy had always been called Stark in appearance, but there was something in his bearing now, something in the proud tilt of his chin that recalled the wild wolf who had once been promised to her. My lady! Maester Luwin appeared at her elbow, his chain clinking softly as he bowed. Is all well? You look as though you've seen a ghost. Perhaps I have, she murmured, watching the bastard disappear into the armory. Tell me, Maester, have you noticed anything strange about my lord husband of late? The old man hesitated, his eyes darting to the yard below. Lord Stark carries many burdens, my lady. The threat from beyond the wall, the king's visit, the attempt on Lady Sansa. That's not what I asked. Luwin sighed, his voice dropping. If you seek answers, my lady, I fear I have none to give. But... He glanced around before continuing. Talking to Lord Stark might clear any misunderstandings. Something heavy settled in Catelyn's stomach. Thank you, Maester. That will be all. When she entered their bedchamber that night, Ned sat before the hearth, just staring at the roaring fire, but his eyes are distant. Will you tell me what troubles you, or must I guess? Catelyn closed the door firmly behind her. Ned broke his intense stare. Cat, don't. She crossed to the window, needing distance between them. I've seen you brood before, Ned Stark. I've seen you carry the weight of the North, of war, of winter. But this... She turned to face him. This is different. This is a secret. And it involves the bastard. His silence was confirmation enough. Yesterday, in the Godswood, something happened. Luke ran as though the others themselves were at his heels. Ned set ice aside and rose, looking older than his years. Cat, please. No more evasions. Her voice was steel. 15 years we've been wed. 15 years I've been the Lady of Winterfell, borne your children, kept your castle. If there is something I should know, tell me now. Is he Brandon's? Ned looked at her in surprise but didn't deny her claim as he crossed to the hearth, bracing one hand against the stone mantel. The flames cast his face in shadow, hiding his expression. No, he's not Brandon's. But he's not mine either. The words fell like stones into still water. He never was. Not in the way Robb and Sansa are. Catelyn gripped the windowsill behind her, suddenly needing its support. Whose then? I made a promise, he said finally. On Lyanna's deathbed, covered in blood and roses. She made me swear. A terrible suspicion dawned in Catelyn's mind. Ned, you couldn't pass. Lyanna's. He turned to face her, his gray eyes haunted. And Rhaegar Targaryen's. Born Demon Sand, though he didn't know that name. A royal bastard. The world tilted beneath Catelyn's feet. 1,000 moments rearranged themselves in her mind. Every cold glance she'd given the boy, every slight, all came crashing down. Robert would have killed him, Ned continued, his voice hollow. You know what happened to Rhaegar's other children. Wrapped in Lannister crimson, presented like trophies. I couldn't let that happen to Lya's boy. My blood. My family. So you claimed him as your bastard. The words left a bitter residue. You let the world believe you'd dishonored me. I had no choice. You had every choice. The coldness in her voice surprised even herself. You could have told me, your wife, the mother of your children. And risk. Risk what? That I might betray you? That I couldn't be trusted with your precious Stark honor. She reached for the nearest object, a silver hairbrush, and hurled it at the wall. It struck with a satisfying crash. 15 years, Ned. 15 years I hated that boy for a sin that wasn't his or yours. His silence inflamed her further. A water pitcher followed the brush, shattering on the stones. I gave you 5 children. I ran your household. I have loved you. And all the while, you let me believe me betrayed. A wooden jewelry box struck the bedpost, splintering. You let me believe you'd been with another woman. That you loved her enough to bring her son home but not enough to speak her name. Ned stood motionless, accepting each missile without flinching. I wanted to tell you, he said quietly. After Robb was born, after Sansa. But the more time passed, the harder it became. And Robert visited. And his spies were everywhere. And if anyone ever suspected. So you let me hate an innocent child instead. A looking glass cracked against the wall. You let me become the cruel stepmother from stories while you played the noble, forgiving lord. Ned made no move to defend himself. I deserve your anger. My anger. Catelyn laughed, a brittle sound like breaking ice. This is not anger, Ned. This is justice. This is 15 years of lies coming due. She sank onto the edge of their bed, suddenly exhausted. The fury that had sustained her moments before drained away, leaving only the cold clarity of betrayal. I will sleep elsewhere, she said, staring at the floor. I cannot look at you right now. Her voice was eerily calm. I cannot share these chambers with you tonight. Perhaps not for many nights. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, I will leave, Ned said in hushed voice as he gathered ice and moved toward the door. He leaves for Old Town tomorrow, he said quietly. With Master Luke. Catelyn didn't answer. I am sorry, Cat. Truly. The door closed softly behind him, leaving her alone with the wreckage of 15 years of misplaced hatred and a marriage built on necessary lies. Outside, the wind howled through the battlements of Winterfell, carrying whispers of secrets long buried and truths now unearthed. Robb walked to the eastern battlements as the cold had cleared his head after hours of lying sleepless, listening to the sounds of Winterfell settling into night. Something felt wrong throughout the castle. His father had barely spoken 3 words, and Jon had vanished entirely. Gray wind padded silently beside him, occasionally brushing against his leg. The direwolf's warmth was a comfort against the midnight chill. As they reached the around corner, Robb heard the rhythmic thud of wood striking wood, punctuated by labored breathing. Jon stood with his back to Robb, shoulders hunched as he hammered a practice sword against a straw-filled training dummy. His strikes lacked the precision Master Luke had drilled into them. These were wild, savage blows fueled by something darker than the discipline of training. Ghost lay nearby, ruby eyes gleaming in the torchlight, watching his master with unblinking attention while Grey Wind trotted over, nudging the white direwolf with his muzzle. Ghost remained motionless, ears flattened against his head. "The dummy's already dead," Robb called, his breath clouding before him. "You can stop torturing its corpse." Jon froze mid-swing but didn't turn. The practice sword remained suspended in the air, trembling slightly. "I was looking for you at supper," Robb continued, moving closer. "Arya said you promised to show her that disarming move before you leave." The sword lowered slowly. "I wasn't hungry." Robb leaned against the stone wall, studying his brother's profile. Jon's face was drawn tight, eyes shadowed. "And now you're beating wooden men at midnight. Did the dummy insult your honor?" Jon's knuckles whitened around the sword hilt. "Leave it be, Robb." "No." Robb straightened. "Father looks like he's seen a ghost. I've heard things breaking in their chambers. Sensed the distraught going through them, and you're up here trying to murder practice equipment. Something's happened." Jon struck the dummy again with sudden ferocity, the wood splintering at the impact. "Lord Stark told me about my mother." The words came out sharp and brittle as ice. Robb waited. The wind whistled between the crenellations, carrying the scent of pine from the wolfswood. "And?" he prompted when Jon remained silent. Jon turned to face him fully, his expression a battlefield of emotions. "She wasn't some tavern wench or servant girl he bedded during the rebellion." Another long silence stretched between them. Below, in the darkened courtyard, a night watchman made his rounds, the torch in his hand a floating ember in the blackness. "She was..." Jon swallowed hard. "Lyanna Stark. Your aunt." Robb felt as though the stone beneath his feet had suddenly tilted. "What? Father did not bed his sister. He didn't rob. My father isn't Lord Stark." Jon's voice cracked slightly. "It was Rhaegar Targaryen." The practice sword clattered to the ground between them. Jon's shoulders slumped, as though speaking the words aloud had drained something vital from him. Robb's mind raced, piecing together fragments of history he'd learned at Maester Luwin's knee. Rhaegar and Lyanna, the kidnapping that sparked Robert's rebellion, the war that toppled a dynasty. All these years, Jon continued, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. Lord Stark let everyone believe I was his bastard. Let Lady Stark hate me. Let me hate myself for something that wasn't. That I never. He trailed off, turning back to face the night sky, his breath coming in white clouds that dissolved into the darkness. Robb found his voice at last. "Does anyone else know?" "Master Luke suspected, I think." Jon gave a hollow laugh. "Is that why you're leaving tomorrow?" "Because of this." Jon shook his head. "The plan was already made. But now, perhaps it's better I go. I don't know who I am anymore, Robb. Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie." Robb considered his brother, his cousin standing there beneath the stars their ancestors had named. The same blood of the first men flowed through their veins, whether Jon's father was Ned Stark or Rhaegar Targaryen. Without hesitation, Robb crossed the space between them and pulled Jon into a fierce embrace. Jon stiffened at first, then gradually relaxed, his forehead dropping to Robb's shoulder. "You're my brother," Robb whispered firmly. "You were my brother when we used to play pranks on Winterfell guards. You were my brother when we hid from Septa Mordane's lessons. You're my brother now that you're our cousin. Blood doesn't change what we are." Jon's hands gripped the back of Robb's cloak. They stood like that for a long moment, the wind swirling around them, carrying memories of all the years they'd spent side by side, learning to ride, to fight, to become men under their father's watchful eye. When they finally separated, something had eased in Jon's expression. They moved to sit on a stone bench built into the battlements, their direwolves settling at their feet. Ghost finally acknowledged Grey Wind with a gentle nudge of his snout. "If Robert Baratheon knew," Jon began. "He'd want you dead," Robb finished bluntly. "The same as he wanted all Targaryens dead. I am still a bastard, even if I am a royal one now, so I have no true claim to that chair," Jon said, the words sounding strange in the cold northern air. "But I don't think King Robert will see it that way." Robb frowned, considering the implications. "Do you want it? The throne? What I wanted? What I dreamed of?" "I don't know." Jon's response was immediate. "All I ever wanted was to be a Stark. But that will never be. And I'm still Jon Snow. Though that's not true either. My mother named me Demon." "Demon?" The name bewildered. He studied Jon's face in the torchlight, searching for traces of this new identity beneath familiar features. Aunt Lyanna had a sense of irony, naming you after the rogue prince and the Blackfire. John's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath wind-chapped skin. The leather of his gloves creaked as his fingers flexed against the stone bench. Or perhaps she knew you would bring new meaning to that name. Robb shifted, his cloak rustling against the battlements. A wry smile tugged at his mouth, though his eyes remained serious. Should I start calling you Demon now? Practice for when you claim your dragon. John's gaze dropped to where Ghost pressed against his legs. The dire wolf looked up again. Something not quite a smile had softened in his expression, but the ghost of one, hovering at the corners of his mouth. To you. John's voice carried the rasp of held-back emotion. To Father, to Arya and the rest? I'll always be John. His fingers found Ghost's fur, burying themselves in the thick white coat. That other name, it belongs to someone I'll never be. Someone who was supposed to have silver hair and purple eyes. Robb watched his brother, cousin, his mind corrected, though the word felt wrong, wrestle with truths that would reshape everything they'd known. But if people knew, they won't, John said firmly. Not from me. Father, Lord Stark, kept this secret for 15 years to protect me. I won't throw that away. Robb nodded slowly. But if things changed, if someday you needed to throw your name around, I want you to know where I'd stand. He turned to face John directly, the torchlight casting half his face in shadow. The North would stand with you. I would stand with you. Always. You mean that? John's words came soft, wondering, as if testing their weight. Every word. Robb shifted on the cold stone, his knee brushing against John's. The contact was brief but grounding, an anchor between them. The North remembers, John, and the North protects its own. John's fingers stilled in Ghost's fur for a heartbeat before resuming their steady rhythm. A warmth bloomed in Robb's chest, spreading outward like sunlight breaking through winter clouds. The sensation caught him off guard. Not his own emotion, but John's, flowing through the forced connection they'd been learning to navigate. Pure, uncomplicated joy radiated from his brother, so different from the guarded restraint John usually wrapped around himself like armor. The feeling made Robb's breath catch. When was the last time he'd felt such unfiltered happiness from John? Not since they were children, before the weight of bastardy had settled fully on his brother's shoulders. This joy tasted clean and bright, like fresh snow, unmarred by the bitter undertones that usually colored John's emotions. Grey Wind's tail began to wag, the dire wolf sensing the shift in the emotional currents between them. Even Ghost seemed affected, his red eyes half closing in contentment as he pressed closer to John's side. The tension in John's shoulders eased. Thank you. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, John spoke again. What about the others? Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon. Robb considered the question carefully. Arya would stand by John without question, but she was young and impulsive. Sansa was too enamored with songs and stories to keep such a dangerous secret. Bran and Rickon were simply too young. We should keep this between us for now, Robb decided. Master Luke already knows, and Father, of course. And Mother. He paused, suddenly understanding his mother's absence and his father's grim expression. Mother knows now too, I think. John nodded, his face solemn in the moonlight. It's safer that way, for all of them. When you return from Old Town, perhaps things will be clearer, Robb said. The world may look different by then. The world already looks different, John replied quietly. Everything does. Grey Wind rose suddenly, ears pricked toward the courtyard below. A moment later, they heard the soft tread of boots on stone. Someone was coming. Master Luke, John murmured, recognizing the presence through the force before the man appeared. Robb felt it too, that distinctive calm certainty that radiated from their teacher. We should go. You have an early start tomorrow. John nodded, rising to his feet. Ghost stood as well, shaking himself before padding to John's side. Remember what I said? Robb told him, clasping his shoulder firmly. Brother. Always. John's smile was small but genuine. Always. As they stood to meet Master Luke, Robb felt a strange certainty settle in his chest. The world was changing around them. Threats from beyond the wall, secrets unraveling within their family, and powers awakening in their blood that hadn't been seen for generations. But some things remained constant, unbreakable. Whatever name John carried, whatever blood flowed in his veins, They were wolves of the same pack. And the pack stays together. The torches in Winterfell's corridors burned low deep into the night. Luke moved silently through the stone hallways, his footsteps barely audible against the cold floor. The castle slept, but the force hummed with unresolved tension, particularly from the Lord's chambers, where Eddard Stark had sequestered himself since his revelation to Jon. Luke paused before the hall. 2 guards stood at attention, their eyes widening slightly at his approach. "I need to speak with Lord Stark," Luke said quietly. The guards exchanged glances. "Lord Stark has asked not to be disturbed. Tell him it concerns tomorrow's journey." Luke's voice carried a gentle suggestion through the force. "He'll want to hear this." The guard hesitated only briefly before one of them leaves to inform Lord Stark. After a muffled response from within, he opened the door just enough to relay Luke's request. A moment later, the guard nodded and stepped aside. "Lord Stark will see you." Luke entered the chamber to find Ned Stark standing by the hearth, still fully dressed despite the late hour. The fire had burned down to embers, casting his face in shadow. The room felt hollow, emptied, Lady Catelyn's absence a palpable void. "Master Luke." Ned didn't turn from the fire. "You should be resting for your journey." "As should you." Luke moved to stand beside him. "Though I sense rest eludes us both tonight. Though you calling me Master Luke feels strange, as I am not a Jedi Master yet. My children call you Master Luke, and calling you simply Luke feels disrespectful." Ned's face showed the ravages of sleeplessness. Skin drawn tight over sharp cheekbones, eyes sunken and rimmed with dark circles. The man had aged years in a single day. "Though I am reluctant of taking that title yet from anyone but the children, I understand," Luke said. "So Jon, what comes next?" Ned's jaw tightened. "What comes next is you take him to Oldtown, far from Robert's spies, while I consider how to keep him safe. And then," Luke pressed gently, "you can't keep him in Winterfell forever." "I never planned to." Ned's voice hardened defensively. "Then what was your plan for him?" Silence filled the room, broken only by the occasional crack from the dying fire. Ned reached for a flagon of wine, pouring himself a cup with a slightly unsteady hand. He didn't offer one to Luke. "Master of arms to Winterfell," Ned finally said. "Or a lord of a small keep." Luke absorbed this. "But no solid plans." "No, not yet." Ned drank deeply. "I only though to protect him, but the truth is death for him." "Perhaps once," Luke acknowledged. "But the boy is changing. They all are. The force grows stronger in them daily." Ned's eyes narrowed. "Your force doesn't change the fact that he's Rhaegar Targaryen's son. Robert would kill him for that alone. Which is why we're going to Oldtown, not King's Landing." Luke moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit courtyard below. "The Citadel may hold knowledge about the threat beyond the wall, and about the abilities awakening in your family. About that," Ned set down his cup, "you should take a regular sword with you. That glowing blade of yours. It would cause far more problems than anything it could solve in the south." Luke nodded. "I've already arranged for Mikken to provide me with a blade." "Good." Ned paused. "Jory Castle and 2 of my most trusted men will escort you to Deepwood Motte." Luke turned, a mild objection forming on his lips. The look in Ned's eyes silenced him before he could speak. This wasn't negotiable. "As you wish," Luke sighed. "Though I had hoped to travel more discreetly. 3 Stark men asking for passage on a ship is far less remarkable than 2 strangers with unusual fighting skills." Ned's tone brooked no argument. "They'll see you safely aboard, then return." Luke inclined his head in acceptance. "We'll avoid the major holds as you suggest. The less attention we draw, the better. The Citadel itself presents dangers." Ned crossed to his desk, unrolling a map of the South. "The Maesters are politically connected to every great house. They gather knowledge and secrets. Not so different from the Jedi archives, then." Luke smiled faintly. "I've navigated political waters before, Lord Stark." "Not like these," Ned insisted. "The politics of the South are played with poison and knives in the dark." Luke reached for the lightsaber at his belt, igniting it one final time in Ned's chambers. The green blade hummed to life, casting eerie shadows across the walls. "And I have faced threats you cannot imagine. This blade has defended against enemies who are much more terrifying than King Robert." Ned's eyes reflected the green light as he studied the weapon. "I know I ask for restraint in using it, but situations can change at a moment's notice. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is restraint. Luke extinguished the blade. I'll carry your northern steel and draw no undue attention. And Jon, Ned asked, can you promise the same of him? His temper has always run hot. Now he knows he carries dragon's blood. I'll protect him, Lord Stark. Luke's voice carried absolute certainty. His heritage changes nothing in that regard. You misunderstand me. Ned's face was grim. I don't doubt your ability to protect him from others. I've seen what you can do. But Jon's greatest enemy may not come from without. Luke remembered the flash of fire from Jon's hands, the momentary yellow gleam in his eyes. You're concerned about his control. I've watched him struggle with his identity his entire life. Ned's voice grew quiet. Now everything he believed about himself has been proven false. The ground beneath him has shifted entirely. Ned's response was hollow. Can you protect him from himself? The question hung in the air between them. Luke considered the man before him, honorable, troubled, carrying burdens few could understand. In many ways, Ned reminded him of Obi-Wan in his later years, haunted by past decisions and their consequences. The dark side calls to us all, Luke said softly. I've faced it within myself. I've watched my father fall to it and rise again. If Jon starts down that path, I'll be there to guide him back. And if you cannot? Luke met Ned's gaze steadily. It won't come to that. There is good in him, I can feel it. Ned turned back to the dying embers. Dawn comes early. You should prepare for your journey. Luke recognized the dismissal but paused at the door. Lord Stark, whatever happens, Jon is still your son in every way that matters. Remember that. Ned didn't turn, but his shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. Luke slipped from the room, leaving the Lord of Winterfell alone with his thoughts and the weight of 15 years of secrets. In the corridor, Luke paused, extending his senses through the Force. Throughout the castle, he felt the sleeping presences of the Stark children. Robb's steady determination, Sansa's troubled dreams, Arya's restless energy, Bran's strange connection to something beyond Little Rickon's wild trashing. And Jon, awake and alert, his Force signature a complex tangle. Tomorrow they would begin a journey that would change everything. Luke could feel it in the currents of the Force. Destiny was in motion, and none of them would be the same when it was done. Chapter 18. Departures and Divides. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. Winterfell, the North. Jon tightened the saddle straps on his Garen, a black courser with a white blaze down its nose. Dawn had barely broken over Winterfell, painting the eastern sky in pale watercolors of pink and gold. Mist rose from the ground like restless spirits, curling around their boots and the horses' fetlocks. The air held the sharp bite of morning chill, the kind that made breath visible and cheeks flush red. Ghost sat nearby, eerily silent as always, his red eyes fixed on Jon. Beside him, Ghost's mother Amidala waited with equal patience for Master Luke. All set, Jory Castle approached, leading his own mount. Behind him, Harwin and Alan checked their provisions one final time. We should reach Deepwood Motte in 10 days if the weather holds. Jon nodded, not trusting his voice just yet. Leaving Winterfell had always been his dream, to go to the Wall, to find glory somewhere beyond the shadow of his bastard name. Now he was leaving, but everything had changed. The name he'd carried, the shame he'd endured, the identity he'd built his life around. All of it built on a lie. The thought still made his stomach clench. The horses are ready, Master Luke said, approaching with his pack. His master has gotten used to wearing northern clothing now. Sturdy leathers and wool with a fur cloak, this time though a sword at his hip rather than his hilt. He has to have hidden it somewhere under the cloak. But we needn't leave until you've said your goodbyes. Arya reached him first, barreling across the yard with needle clutched in her hand. Her hair was a wild tangle, and her face was flushed from running. Look! She brandished the slender blade, taking the stance he'd shown her. I've been practicing every morning. Watch! She executed a series of movements, still clumsy but showing promise. Each foot placement deliberate, each thrust of the blade careful and precise. Jon felt a tightness in his throat. Water dancer in the making, he said, ruffling her hair. Keep your shoulders loose, remember? And stick them with the pointy end, she finished for him. I know. Good. He knelt to her level. Keep practicing. When I return, I expect you to best me. Her face crumpled suddenly, and she threw her arms around his neck. I hate that you're leaving. I'll come back, he promised, holding her tight. I swear it. You better. She pulled away, scrubbing at her eyes with the back of her hand. Bran approached next, solemn-faced and serious beyond his years. Something had changed in him since the Force training began as a stillness. An awareness that sometimes made Jon uneasy settled in Bran. We'll meet again, Bran said, his voice carrying a strange certainty. When the snow falls and the white winds blow. That sounds ominous, Jon replied, trying to smile. Bran shrugged. It's what I saw. The lone wolf returns to the pack in winter. Jon clasped his shoulder. Keep practicing what Master Luke taught you. You have a gift, Bran. Jon managed to turn the clasp into a hug before turning to Sansa. She stood slightly apart, elegant even at this early hour, her auburn hair neatly braided. In her hands, she held something small and dark. I made this for you, she said, her voice formal but not cold. She held out a square of black cloth. It's a favor. Knights carry them for luck. Jon took it, surprised by the gesture. On the cloth, she had embroidered a white direwolf, running with its head raised. Ghost perfectly captured in thread and fabric. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Thank you, Sansa. He struggled to find more words. Their relationship had always been the most distant, shaped by her mother's influence. It's beautiful work. I'm sorry I wasn't a better sister, she said suddenly, color rising in her cheeks. You have nothing to apologize for. I do. I believed. She glanced away. Well, it doesn't matter what I believed. Be safe, Jon. She surprised him further by rising on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. He tucked the favor carefully inside his jerkin, close to his heart. Rickon was last and the most difficult. The youngest Stark clung to Jon's leg, his face buried against Jon's knee, refusing to let go. Don't want you to go, he sobbed, his small body shaking. Jon picked him up, holding him close. I'll bring you a present from the south, he promised. Something wonderful. Don't want a present. Want you to stay. Jon looked helplessly at Robb, who stepped forward with old Nan. The ancient woman held out her arms. Come, little one, she crooned. Your brother has important work to do. Stories. Rickon hiccuped. All the stories you want, she promised. About Brandon the Builder and the children of the forest. Reluctantly, Rickon allowed himself to be transferred to old Nan's thin but surprisingly strong arms. Jon felt the absence of his warmth immediately. Robb was the last and in many ways the hardest farewell. They'd shared everything, training, lessons, meals, jokes as brothers. Well, Robb said. This is it. This is it, Jon echoed. The next time I see you, you'll probably be speaking like some fancy Southron lord. Robb's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. All perfumed and soft-handed. Never, Jon swore. Do not even dare to make such jests. I'll come back exactly as I left. No, you won't. Robb's voice grew serious. None of us will be the same. Too much has changed already. They embraced, a fierce hug that said all the things they couldn't put into words. When they separated, Jon saw movement behind Robb and froze. Lady Catelyn Stark stood watching them, her face pale in the morning light. A terrible silence fell over the courtyard. Jon felt his spine stiffen. He had spent 15 years avoiding this woman's cold stares, her subtle cruelties, her persistent reminder that he didn't belong. What did she want now? To ensure he actually left? To warn him never to return? Her presence clearly surprised everyone, not just Jon. Robb turned, his expression shifting to something Jon couldn't read. A knowing look that left Jon puzzled. But Sansa, Arya, and Bran looked as confused as Jon felt. Lady Stark approached slowly, her hands clasped tightly before her. Up close, Jon could see her eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn with fatigue. She looked as though she hadn't slept. Jon, she said, his name awkward on her lips. Jon inclined his head slightly. Lady Stark. She swallowed hard. Her voice caught. She tried again. I wanted to speak with you before you departed. Jon waited, tension coiling in his gut. Master Luke had moved to stand beside the Stark children, drawing them slightly back, giving this moment space, though Jon noticed his teacher watched with keen interest. I did not come to see you, Lady Stark continued, her voice strangled. After what was revealed, that was cowardly of me. Jon blinked, confused by the direction of this conversation. I've come to apologize, she said, the words rushing out now as though she feared losing her nerve. Not just for my absence these past days, but for all of it. For 15 years of coldness. For making you feel unwelcome in your own home. For blaming you for circumstances you could not control. Jon stared at her, speechless. He glanced at his siblings, at Rob's knowing expression, at the shock on the faces of the others. So they didn't know either. Whatever had prompted this, only Rob seemed aware of it. You don't need to say anything, Lady Stark continued. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know. Her voice faltered. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing his cheek in the briefest of touches. I'm sorry for what I couldn't give you. Before Jon could formulate any response, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. Jon watched her go, a storm of conflicting emotions raging within him. What was that? Arya demanded, breaking the silence. What did she mean? What's been revealed? Jon looked to Rob, who shook his head slightly. The secret remained a secret still. The rest of the Stark children didn't know of his true parentage. Nothing, Jon said finally. Just, Lady Stark and I have come to an understanding. Arya looked unconvinced, but before she could press further, Lord Stark emerged from the Great Keep. His arrival saved Jon from difficult questions, though it brought its own complications. Father, Uncle Eddard now, though the title felt foreign even in Jon's thoughts, approached with measured steps. Ghost rose to his feet, padding over to Jon's side as if sensing his discomfort. Jon felt a curious mixture of emotions at the sight of the man he'd spent his life believing was his father. Gratitude for the protection he'd provided. Anger at the lies. Confusion about who he was supposed to be now. Love, still, despite everything. A love that made the anger burn all the hotter. The day has come, Uncle Eddard said, his voice carrying the weight of the North in its deep timbre. He looked older than he had a week ago, lines carved deeper around his eyes and mouth. It has, Lord Stark, Jon replied, the formality a shield against the rawness of his feelings. Uncle Eddard's eyes met his, gray to gray, the same stark coloring that had once seemed proof of Jon's paternity, now just another layer of the deception. You're justified in your feelings, Jon, Uncle Eddard said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. I apologize for not telling you sooner. I had always meant to, but I wanted to have a plan first. A way to protect you when the truth came out. Jon said nothing, but his jaw clenched. If given the chance to do it all again, Lord Stark continued, I would make the same choice. I would rather have you alive and angry with me than dead at Robert's hand. The words struck Jon like an arrow. The stark reality of what his life had been, what it could have been, laid bare. The son of Rhaegar Targaryen, born in the aftermath of rebellion, when Targaryen children were wrapped in crimson cloaks and presented to Robert Baratheon like trophies. Whatever you choose now, Uncle Eddard said, whatever path you take, if you reveal yourself to the world or keep the secret, I stand with you. Always. Jon felt tears threatening, a burning behind his eyes. He reached for the Force, using the techniques Master Luke had taught him to ground himself, to find that center of calm within the storm of his emotions. I want to hate you, Jon admitted, his voice low so only Uncle Eddard could hear. There are moments when I do, but then I remember who raised me, who taught me honor and duty and sacrifice. He drew a breath. You worked with the hand you were dealt. I understand that, but 15 years of lies. That's not something I can simply set aside. I need time. Uncle Eddard nodded slowly. Time you shall have. Just know that Winterfell will always be your home, Jon. Whatever name you choose to bear. The sun had risen higher now, the mist beginning to burn away. Jory cleared his throat, a gentle reminder that they needed to depart if they hoped to make good distance before nightfall. It's time, Master Luke said, stepping forward. Jon nodded, turning to mount his horse. Ghost moved to his side, ready for the journey ahead. Jon watched as Master Luke spoke quietly to the Stark children, giving them one final lesson until his return. Remember, Luke told them, your strength comes not from power itself, but from how you choose to use it. Practice control, practice patience, and watch out for each other. They nodded solemnly, even Rickon, though Jon doubted the youngest understood the full meaning of the words. Master Luke mounted his horse, Amidala rising to her feet beside him. Uncle Eddard approached them one last time. Keep your word, he said to Luke, his voice carrying in the morning stillness. Do this, and I'll grant you anything in my power. Jon frowned, wondering what promise had passed between them. But Master Luke merely nodded, his expression solemn. They rode out through the Hunter's Gate, the smallest of Winterfell's 4 gates, which opened directly onto the Wolfswood beyond. Jon turned in his saddle for one last look at the castle that had been his home, the towers and walls and courtyards where he'd grown from boy to man, where he'd lived a lie that had protected him. Ghost paused at the edge of the trees, raising his head. A mournful howl split the morning silence, a sound so rare from the albino wolf that Jon shivered at the sound of it. The call was answered, one by one, by the other direwolves within Winterfell's walls. Grey Wind, Lady, Nymeria, Summer, Shaggy Dog. Their voices rising in a chorus that followed Jon and his companions into the Wolfswood. Jon felt it like a physical pain in his chest, the separation, the uncertainty, the loss of what he'd always believed himself to be. Yet beneath the pain lay something else, a pull southward, a sense of destiny unfolding. He did not look back again. Bravos, Essos. The Braavosi fog clung to Daenerys like a second skin, its dampness seeping through her threadbare cloak and into her bones. 3 weeks at sea had left her with sea legs that now struggled to adjust to solid ground. The cobblestones beneath her feet felt strangely unyielding after the constant sway of Captain Grolio's ship. Bravos rose around them in layers of stone and shadow, buildings stacked upon buildings, bridges arching over canals where water lapped against ancient foundations. The Titan of Bravos loomed in the distance, partially obscured by mist, a colossus of bronze and stone standing watch over the lagoon. They had passed beneath its massive legs hours earlier, the horn blast announcing their arrival still echoing in Daenerys' ears. "Keep your hood up," Ser Jorah murmured beside her. His hand rested on his sword hilt, eyes constantly scanning the narrow street. "The spider has little birds everywhere, even here. I doubt Lord Varys concerns himself with a girl who fled her wedding," Daenerys said, though she tugged her hood lower nonetheless. "My brother is the one who named himself king. You underestimate your importance, princess." Jorah's voice was low. "You are the last female Targaryen. That alone makes you valuable." Doria walked on Daenerys' other side, her lysine beauty hidden beneath a plain brown cloak. The handmaid carried a small bundle of their meager possessions, while Daenerys clutched the leather satchel containing her dragon eggs against her chest. She had not let them out of her sight since leaving Pentos. "We need a place to rest," Daenerys said, noting how Doria's steps had begun to drag. "And food. Something hot." Jorah nodded. "There's an inn ahead that caters to merchants from the free cities. Clean enough, but not so fine that questions will be asked." The inn stood 3 stories tall, its whitewashed walls stained by salt and age. A carved wooden mermaid hung above the door, her paint faded but still recognizable. Inside, warmth and the scent of roasting meat greeted them, along with the low hum of conversation in a dozen different tongues. Jorah guided them to a corner away from the hearth, where shadows offered some measure of privacy. "Wait here," he said. "I'll secure rooms." Daenerys sank onto the bench, relief washing through her aching limbs. Bravos was not what she had expected. Viserys had spoken of the free cities as poor shadows of old Valyria, but Bravos had a character all its own, proud, secretive, wreathed in fog and mystery. It reminded her of the visions the dragon eggs had shown her. "Are you well, princess?" Doria asked, her voice barely audible above the inn's noise. "Dany," Daenerys corrected gently. "You have to use that name now. I just feel lost now that I am away from my brother." She had been prepared to give herself to Khal Drogo, to endure whatever came after, until the dragon eggs had shown her another path. "But yes, I am well enough. Just tired." Across the room, Jorah spoke with the innkeeper, a stout Braavosi with an impressive mustache. Gold was about to change hands when the knight then suddenly stiffened, his attention caught by something behind the innkeeper. Daenerys followed his gaze. Near the hearth sat a group of men in sea-green cloaks. Their voices carried the harsh accents of the north, and a silver pin shaped like a trident secured each cloak. Jorah returned to their table with surprising speed, his face tight with poorly concealed alarm. "We must go," he said, taking Daenerys by the elbow. "Now." "But the rooms," she began. "Now," he repeated, already steering her toward the door. Doria followed without question, though confusion creased her brow. The fog had thickened outside, turning the afternoon into a gray twilight. Jorah led them swiftly through a maze of narrow streets and over small footbridges, putting distance between them and the inn. His pace was relentless, forcing Daenerys to nearly run to keep up. Ser Yora, she finally said, breathless, pulling her arm from his grip. Explain yourself. The knight glanced back the way they had come, then at the empty street around them. Those men in the inn wore the sigil of House Manderley. When this meant nothing to her, he continued. The Manderleys are a noble house from White Harbor, the North's only city. They are sworn to House Stark. The usurper's dog, Daenerys said, her voice hardening. Viserys had taught her the names of the usurper's allies, the traitors who had helped destroy her family. Why would his men be in Braavos? White Harbor conducts trade with Braavos regularly, Yora explained. But Manderley men here now when we've just arrived. It's too great a risk. Do you think they recognized you? A shadow crossed Yora's weathered face. I pray not. But we should find lodging elsewhere, somewhere they're less likely to frequent. They continued more cautiously now, working their way deeper into the city. The respectable inns and shops gave way to seedier establishments. Brothels with red lanterns, taverns where hard-eyed men drank in silence, narrow buildings that leaned against each other like drunken revelers. Yora chose a small inn tucked between a chandlery and what appeared to be a pawnbroker's shop. The sign above the door depicted a three-headed dog, the paint so faded it was barely recognizable. It's not what you deserve, he said apologetically, but will be less noticed here. Inside, the common room was dimly lit and smelled of cheap wine and unwashed bodies. The innkeeper, a rail-thin woman with a scar across one cheek, barely glanced at them as Yora negotiated for 2 adjoining rooms on the upper floor. Their rooms were small but clean enough, with narrow beds and shuttered windows that overlooked a fetid canal. Doria busied herself lighting a brazier to ward off the damp chill, while Daenerys carefully placed her dragon eggs on the bed. When Yora returned with bread, cheese, and a flagon of watered wine, Daenerys motioned for both of them to sit. I owe you both my thanks, she said, tearing a piece of bread. And perhaps an explanation. No explanation is needed, princess, Yora said. You chose freedom over captivity. Any person of honor would understand that choice. But I had no plan beyond escape. The admission tasted bitter. I knew only that I could not bear to be sold like a broodmare. I could not stand another moment of Viserys' cruelty. She touched the satchel containing the dragon eggs. And these? They called to me. They showed me things. Doria leaned forward. The dreams you spoke of on the ship? Daenerys nodded, hesitating. She had mentioned the dreams briefly during their voyage, but had kept the details to herself, fearing they would think her mad. Now, in this dingy room far from everything she had known, the truth spilled out. I saw a great wall of ice, stretching from horizon to horizon, tall as the sky, snow falling on dark stone, children standing in a circle beneath a white tree with a face carved into its trunk. Her fingers traced patterns on the rough wooden table. I saw a man with a blade of green light, and 2 boys, one with dark hair and gray eyes like winter storms, the other with hair like copper and eyes blue as the ocean. They were fighting, but not as enemies. More like brothers training together. She looked up to find Yora staring at her, his face drained of color. You've seen these boys? Yora asked, his voice unusually hoarse. Many times, Daenerys confirmed. The dark-haired one especially. When our eyes meet across the vision, I feel connected to him somehow. Yora reached for the wine with an unsteady hand. The wall stands in the north of Westeros, princess. 8,000 years old, they say, built to keep out the wildlings and darker things. He drank deeply. And the boys you describe, I believe I know them. Now it was Daenerys's turn to feel the blood drain from her face. How could you know them? The dark-haired boy with gray eyes. That would be Jon Snow, Lord Stark's bastard son. The red-haired one with blue eyes would be Robb Stark, his heir. Yora set down his cup. I saw them both the last time I was in Winterfell, the Stark ancestral seat. They were boys then, but your description matches them precisely. These are real people, Daenerys whispered. Not dreams or fantasies, but flesh and blood. The realization sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the room's chill. And the wall of ice? The wall. It guards the northern border of the 7 kingdoms. Yora studied her face. Princess, these visions, do they tell you to go north? She hesitated. The eggs had shown her the north, yes, but what did it mean? Why would they pull her toward the home of her family's enemies? I believe they do, she admitted finally. But how can I go to the north? The usurper would have my head the moment I set foot in Westeros. Few in Westeros would recognize you on sight, Yora pointed out. You were born after your family fled, and your Targaryen features could be disguised. With the right story, the right companions. Would you take me there, Ser Yora? Daenerys asked. To this wall. Pain flickered across the knight's face. I would find you a boat to White Harbor if that is your wish, princess. I would see you safely to the north. But I cannot set foot in the north myself. Why not? Yora looked away, his jaw tight. I was exiled by Lord Eddard Stark for selling poachers to a Tyroshi slaver. It's a crime punishable by death in the north. If I return, I forfeit my life. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken things. Daenerys did not press him further. Everyone had their shames, their secrets. She knew that better than most. I won't ask you to risk your life, she said finally. But if my path leads north, I must follow it. We'll find a way, Yora promised. When the time comes. For now, we should rest. We're safe here for the night at least. Daenerys nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. As Yora excused himself to his own room and Doria prepared for sleep, Daenerys sat beside the dragon eggs, running her fingers over their scaled surfaces. The black egg pulsed with warmth beneath her touch. In her mind, she saw snow falling on dark stone walls, felt the bitter cold of the north. The eggs belonged there somehow. She knew with inexplicable certainty. Something waited for her there, something tied to her blood and to these stone dragons. Yet how could she go north when the usurper's dog ruled those lands? When the man who had helped destroy her family held dominion over the very place her visions pulled her toward. Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, last of her name, laid her head down beside the dragon eggs and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, she would rest and dream of walls of ice and dragons flying in the snow. Chapter 19. Gilded Threats. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. King's Landing, the Crownlands. Tyrion Lannister nursed his wine as he surveyed the tourney grounds from his perch on the viewing stands. The smell of horseshit, sweat, and roasting meat hung in the air, a perfume that reminded him why he preferred the controlled stink of brothels to the chaotic reek of nobility at play. Knights pranced about on destriers worth more than most peasants would see in a lifetime, while the small folk roared approval from makeshift scaffolds that looked ready to collapse beneath their collective weight. His father sat in the royal box, cold and imperious in his new role as Hand. Tywin hadn't wanted this tourney, had called it wasteful frivolity. But Robert had insisted on celebrating his new hand, though most likely the king just wanted another tourney. The king himself was conspicuously absent, no doubt sleeping off last night's excesses with some whores. Tyrion spotted his quarry near the refreshment tables. Peter Baelish stood alone for once, watching the proceedings with that perpetual half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. The Master of Coin wore a doublet of silver-gray silk with his mockingbird pin glinting in the sunlight. "Now's our chance, Pod," Tyrion murmured to his squire. "Wait here. I'll signal if I need rescue from Lord Baelish's crushing wit." Tyrion waddled through the crowd, ignoring the sideways glances and poorly concealed sneers. The wine sloshed in his belly, just enough to dull the edges without blunting his mind. He would need his wits for this conversation. "Lord Baelish," he called as he approached. "How fortunate to find you momentarily unencumbered by your many admirers." Littlefinger turned, his smile widening fractionally. "Lord Tyrion, pleasant surprise. I expected you'd be celebrating your father's ascension with something stronger than that watered piss they're serving here." "The day is young," Tyrion replied, taking a position beside Baelish that allowed him to watch both the tourney field and the man's face. "And I find sobriety has its uses when discussing matters of state." "Matters of state?" Littlefinger raised an eyebrow. "How dreary. I was hoping for your usual repertoire of whore jokes and witticisms." Tyrion laughed. "Those I save for friends. Speaking of celebrations, I hear congratulations are in order for Lord Renly and Lady Margaery. Their betrothal announcement seems to have caught everyone by surprise." Littlefinger's gaze flickered briefly across the stands to where Renly sat with several Tyrell retainers, resplendent in green and gold. "Indeed, love strikes in the most unexpected places. And what will the crown be gifting the happy couple? Something appropriately magnificent, I trust." "Your Lord Father has already ordered an appropriate gift," Littlefinger said, his voice dropping slightly. "Something to honor both houses." His eyes remained on Renly, a calculation in them that Tyrion found unsettling. How efficient of him, Tyrion remarked. My father wastes no time, much like your recent adjustments to the grain tariffs. I was reviewing the ledgers this morning, fascinating reading truly, and noticed the duties on shipments to the north have tripled. Something hardened in Littlefinger's eyes, though his smile remained fixed. You've developed an interest in ledgers? How unexpected. I'd have thought you preferred more carnal entertainments. I contain multitudes, Lord Baelish. Tyrion swirled the dregs of his wine. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? The north reports more wildling attacks, and suddenly their food costs triple. Littlefinger's smile didn't reach his eyes. Supply and demand, Lord Tyrion. Winter is coming, as the Starks are so fond of reminding us. Prudent merchants adjust their prices accordingly. Prudent merchants, yes, but the crown. Tyrion placed his empty cup on a passing servant's tray. One might think we'd wish to support a region facing increased threats. One might think many things, Littlefinger replied smoothly. But revenue is revenue, and the royal coffers remain distressingly empty despite my best efforts. Tyrion watched a knight from the Vale unseat some minor lordling from the Crownlands. Steel ringing against steel as lance met shield. The crowd roared its approval. Speaking of the north, Tyrion said casually, have you heard about any unfortunate business at Winterfell? An attack on a Stark, I'm told. He watched Littlefinger's face with the same intensity a maester might study a rare specimen. The man's reaction was minimal, a brief tightening around the eyes, an almost imperceptible shift in posture. But it was there. Troubling news indeed, Littlefinger said after the briefest pause. Though I wonder at your sources. I've heard nothing of the sort. Curious. I thought your pretty faces had eyes and ears. Tyrion studied his nails. A shame. I'd have thought news concerning Catelyn Stark, or her brood, would interest you particularly. Lady Stark's welfare has always concerned me, Littlefinger said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We were close as children. So I've heard. Tyrion met the man's gaze directly. Close enough that you'd notice if someone wished her family harm? Littlefinger's laugh was light, practiced. Lord Tyrion, if you're implying something, I encourage you to speak plainly. These veiled accusations ill become a man of your stature. Nothing veiled about it. I recently heard that a Valyrian steel dagger was used. Took a bit of coin to get that one. Such weapons are rare and costly. One might wonder who could afford such an extravagance. One might indeed. Littlefinger's eyes narrowed slightly. Though if I were investigating such a matter, I might look closer to home before casting aspersions abroad. Meaning families are complicated things. Littlefinger adjusted his mockingbird pin. Lannisters above all should understand that. The threat lingered between them like the scent of something rotten beneath perfume. Tyrion forced himself to smile. My father has taken a personal interest in this matter. He finds threats to great houses destabilizing. Littlefinger raised an eyebrow. It would be a shame if His Grace discovered Lord Tywin approved the new taxes on the north. Robert has such affection for the Starks. Imagine his reaction upon learning we're squeezing them during troubled times. Tyrion blinked, caught off guard. My father approved. Oh, not directly. Littlefinger waved a dismissive hand. The proposal came from your sister. She approached me most discreetly. Something about ensuring the North remembers its place. Tyrion felt the pieces shifting in his mind. A Cyvasse board rearranging itself. Cersei. Always Cersei. How interesting, he managed. My sister rarely concerns herself with financial matters. She concerns herself with many things these days. Littlefinger leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of mint. Your brother as well. They've been quite inseparable since your departure for Winterfell. Sharing burdens, no doubt. The implication hung in the air, delicate as spider silk but just as dangerous. Family loyalty is a Lannister trait, Tyrion said carefully. Indeed. Littlefinger's smile widened. Some might say unnaturally so. Before Tyrion could respond, a trumpet blast announced the next joust. Littlefinger straightened, adjusting his sleeves with practiced elegance. If you'll excuse me, Lord Tyrion, I promised Lord Renly I'd join him for this bout. Do give your Lord Father my regards, and perhaps suggest he look to his own house before concerning himself with others. Tyrion watched him go, that slight frame moving with deliberate grace through the crowd. Podrick appeared at his elbow, silent as always. He's lying about something, Tyrion said quietly. The question is what? Podrick said nothing, waiting for instructions with puppy-like devotion. We need someone watching him, Tyrion continued, thinking aloud. Someone skilled. Someone he wouldn't notice. He turned to his squire. Pod, I need you to find me a certain sort of person. Someone from the bowels of King's Landing who knows how to watch without being seen. What kind of person, M-Lord? Podrick asked, his voice barely audible above the crowd's roar as another night fell. Tyrion considered the question. Not the gold cloaks, too obvious and too corrupt. Not Varys's little birds, the spider had his own agenda. He needed someone loyal only to gold, with skills honed in the city's shadows. Someone who's survived by being invisible, Tyrion decided. A cut purse, perhaps, or a street child who's managed to grow to adulthood. Find them, bring them to me, and ensure no one sees you do it. Yes, M-Lord. Podrick nodded, his earnest face betraying nothing but determination. As his squire slipped away through the crowd, Tyrion turned his gaze back to where Littlefinger now sat beside Renly Baratheon, laughing at some jest. The Master of Coin caught his eye briefly across the distance and raised his wine cup in mocking salute. Tyrion didn't return the gesture. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating angles and connections. Cersei requesting tax increases on the north. An assassin with a Valyrian steel dagger targeting Sansa Stark. And Littlefinger somehow in the middle of it all. The game was growing more dangerous by the day. Winterfell, the north. The solar felt colder than usual despite the crackling hearth. Ned stood at the window, watching snow descend in thick flakes outside Winterfell's walls. 5 days since Jon had departed with Luke Skywalker for Old Town. 5 days of wondering if he'd made the right choice in letting his sister's son venture south. Even with the protection of that strange green blade. I should have told him years ago. The thought gnawed at him like a winter wolf. Years of lies, and then to thrust the truth upon him so suddenly. Jon's face when he'd learned of his true parentage haunted Ned's dreams. The shock, the betrayal, the rage that had summoned fire without touch. Another reminder of the Targaryen blood that flowed through his veins. Blood that would see him dead if Robert ever learned the truth. A knock interrupted his brooding. Enter, he called, not turning from the window. My lord. Maester Luwin's voice carried a note of concern that made Ned finally face him. The old man clutched a scroll in his weathered hand, chain links clinking softly as he approached. A raven from King's Landing. Ned frowned. Robert again? No, my lord. The royal seal, but not the king's personal mark. Luwin extended the scroll. The hand's signature. Tywin Lannister's mark. Ned broke the crimson wax, unfurling the parchment with growing unease. His eyes scanned the flowing script once, twice, a third time, as if repetition might change the words before him. Gods be good, he breathed, a cold fury settling in his bones. The crown has tripled our tax burden. Effective immediately. Tripled. Luwin's eyebrows rose toward his receding hairline. On what grounds? Military necessity. Preparations for potential Targaryen threat from across the narrow sea. Ned's laugh held no humor. As if we don't face a far greater threat from the north. This is most unusual, Lord Stark. Luwin's fingers stroked his chain anxiously. Such increases typically require approval from the King's Council, with proper notice. The proper notice is here, signed by the Hand himself. Ned tossed the scroll onto his desk, where it curled back into itself like a wounded animal. They know exactly what they do. With winter coming, with the small folk already struggling to fill their storehouses. Ned pressed his palms against the desk, leaning his weight on them as if the physical pressure might somehow contain the anger rising within him. The Lords Tallhart, Glover, and Serwyn had already arrived for the Northern Council he'd called to discuss the wall's defenses. The other lords slowly trickling in. Now he would have to tell them their people must somehow find coin for both the Watch and the Crown's suddenly insatiable appetite. Send for Lady Stark and Robb, he said finally, and close the door behind you. This conversation must remain private for now. Luwin bowed. At once, my lord. Alone again, Ned moved to the hearth, staring into the flames as if they might contain answers. First an assassin with Valyrian steel, now this deliberate provocation. The south reaching its gilded fingers north, just as a darker threat gathered beyond the wall. Threats from both sides, he thought grimly, and the north caught between. The door opened to admit Catelyn, her face composed but eyes wary. Their relationship had frayed since the truth of John had emerged, not broken, but strained by 15 years of unnecessary pain. Behind her came Robb, looking more Stark than ever with his stern expression and straight posture. The boy, no, the young man, had shouldered leadership admirably during Ned's absence, but the shadow of John's revelation hung between them still. "You asked for us, my lord?" Catelyn's formality cut deeper than her anger would have. "Close the door, Robb." His son complied, then took position beside his mother. Neither sat. The room felt suddenly smaller, filled with unspoken words and buried hurts. "A raven from King's Landing." Ned gestured to the scroll. "The crown has tripled our tax burden. Effective immediately." Catelyn's sharp intake of breath was the only sound for several heartbeats. Then Robb stepped forward, snatching up the parchment with barely controlled fury. "They cannot do this," he said, voice low and dangerous. "The North already struggles to feed itself with winter approaching. The small folk will starve." "They do not care," Catelyn said bitterly. "It's the great houses they mean to humble." Ned studied his wife's face. "You see a pattern in this." "I do." Her blue eyes met his, and for a moment the coldness between them thawed in shared purpose. "First an assassin with a Valyrian steel dagger, a failed attempt to strike at our family. Now this, a successful strike at our treasury." Her voice hardened. "The lion flexes his claws." "Tywin Lannister," Ned agreed, "though I doubt he acts without at least tacit approval from Robert." "Robert cares nothing for coin," Catelyn countered. "He drowns himself in wine and leaves governance to his wife's family. This reeks of Lannister scheming." Robb paced the solar, reminding Ned painfully of John in his agitation. "What will we do, father? We cannot possibly meet these demands and still prepare the North for winter. And the darkness beyond the wall," Ned added grimly. "No, we cannot do both." "Then we refuse," Robb said immediately. "The North can stand alone if need be." "The North has never stood alone," Catelyn corrected him gently. "Even during the conquest, Torrhen Stark knelt rather than see his people burned." Ned moved to the map table where carved wooden pieces represented the great houses of the North. He stared at the tiny direwolf marking Winterfell, feeling the weight of every Stark who had held these lands before him. "I had planned to return to the Wall after our council," he said slowly. "To meet with Mance Rayder if possible, to learn what drives the wildlings south." He looked up, meeting first Catelyn's eyes, then Robb's. "But now I must go to King's Landing instead." "No." The word escaped Catelyn's lips before she could stop it. Her hand covered her mouth, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "I must," Ned insisted. "Someone must make Robert see reason. The crown's coffers overflow with Lannister gold. They have no need of northern taxes. This is deliberate provocation." "It's a trap," Catelyn said, moving closer, their recent estrangement forgotten in her concern. "They want to draw you south, away from your power base, away from the North's protection." "I agree with Mother," Robb said. "Send an envoy. Delegate this to Dash." "To whom?" Ned's voice cut through their objections. "Who speaks with the authority of the Warden of the North? Who can make Robert Baratheon remember the friendship that forged a kingdom?" Silence answered him. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing Winterfell in white. "I don't like it either," Ned said more gently. "But winter is coming. The long night gathers its strength. We cannot fight enemies on two fronts, not the crown and the others. And if you go south and never return?" Catelyn's question hung in the air, echoing fears none of them could dismiss. "Like your father before you?" "I will not go as a rebel or a traitor," Ned answered. "I go as Warden of the North, to speak with my king about the realm's security, about the true threat that gathers beyond our borders." Robb's face had gone carefully blank, the way it did when he struggled with difficult emotions. "And what of the Northern Council? The preparations for what we saw at Castle Black?" "I will hold the council," Ned said firmly. "But you shall lead the actual efforts, and it's time the Northern Lords saw you as more than a boy." He turned to Catelyn. "And you will advise him as you've advised me." Something passed between them then, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. Catelyn nodded slowly. "When will you leave?" "After the council. 2 weeks, perhaps 3. Ned rubbed his beard, thinking of all that must be arranged. "I need the Northern Lords to understand what we face, what I saw at Castle Black. The Dead Walk, and we must be ready. And if the South will not listen?" Robb asked. Then the North remembers. Ned's voice hardened. And the North prepares alone. The three stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the snow continued its relentless descent outside the window. Beyond Winterfell's walls, beyond the wall itself, Ned knew the true enemy gathered strength. But for now, the Game of Thrones demanded his attention. A game he had never wanted to play, yet found himself forced into once more. For the living, he thought grimly. For the realm. For my family. Send Luwin back, he said finally. We have ravens to dispatch and preparations to make. Robb nodded and moved to the door, but Catelyn lingered, her eyes searching his face. Be careful in the south, Ned, she said softly. You are too honest for their games. I know. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. But sometimes even the wolf must venture from his woods. Just remember, she said. The lion sleeps in the sun, but the wolf endures the winter. Their fingers entwined briefly before she followed Robb from the solar, leaving Ned alone with the snow, the flames, and the weight of the North upon his shoulders. Castle Black, the wall. Samwell Tarly's knees trembled beneath his black woolen breeches as he stood before Lord Commander Mormont's desk. The old bear's solar was warm, too warm, with the hearth blazing and the windows sealed against the bitter northern winds. But Sam couldn't stop shivering. Maester Aemon sat nearby, his milky eyes fixed on nothing, chains clinking softly whenever he shifted his ancient frame. You're no fighter, Tarly, but that head of yours might serve the watch better than any sword. Mormont's gruff voice cut through the crackling of the fire. The Lord Commander ran a weathered hand through his beard, studying Sam with those hard eyes that missed nothing. Sam swallowed, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. And my lord, the ranging beyond the wall. Mormont didn't finish the thought, but Sam understood. The rumors had spread through Castle Black like wildfire. Dead men walking, brothers vanishing, wildlings fleeing south in numbers unseen for generations. The records in our library are inadequate. Maester Aemon's voice rasped, his frail fingers trembling as they traced the links of his chain. Ancient knowledge fades. What was once common wisdom now exists only in fragments, hidden in the dustiest corners of the Citadel. Sam's heart skipped. The Citadel, that great sanctuary of knowledge he'd once dreamed of before his father had crushed those hopes with the same brutal efficiency he'd crushed everything else about his eldest son. The Citadel must be warned of what comes, Aemon continued. And I am too old for such a journey. Me? Sam squeaked, then flushed scarlet. You want me to go to Old Town? You can read. You can write. You've devoured every book in our sorry excuse for a library. Mormont pushed a map across his desk. And unlike most of these sheep-witted recruits, you understand what you read. Sam stared at the map, yellowed parchment showing the long journey from the wall to Old Town. His fingers traced the route involuntarily, lingering on the Citadel's mark. A tower inked at the mouth of the Honeywine River. You'll research everything about the Long Night, Mormont continued. The others, the last hero, ancient defenses. Anything that might help us understand what we face. The Watch needs a new maester and we need answers, the old bear stated flatly. You'll most likely to find both in Old Town. Sam's mind raced. The very place he'd once begged his father to let him go. But who will serve as steward to Maester Aemon while I'm gone? Clydas will attend me, Aemon said with a gentle smile. And when you return with your chain, you'll bring the wisdom we need to face the darkness. My chain? Sam's voice cracked. You mean become a maester? Why not? Mormont growled. You've the mind for it. Unless you'd rather spend your days counting turnips in the storeroom. And no, my lord. Hope, dangerous, fragile hope, bloomed in Sam's chest, though he tried to smother it before it could take root. Good things didn't happen to Samwell Tarly. His father had made that abundantly clear. Come with me, Samwell. Aemon rose shakily to his feet. I will try and get you ready for the Archmesters. Sam helped the old man down the winding steps to the library beneath the rookery. The familiar smell of parchment and leather binding calmed his racing heart. Here, among the books, Sam had always found refuge. These. Aemon's fingers found specific volumes with uncanny precision despite his blindness. The accounts of the last ranging during the Long Night. Records of wildling migrations. Legends of the children of the forest and their pact with the first men. Sam gathered the books, stacking them carefully. When his fingers brushed an ancient leather volume bound with ironwood clasps, a strange warmth spread through his palm. He nearly dropped the book in shock. A soft blue light seeped from between his fingers, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the library's gloom. Maester Eamon? Sam stammered, but the words died in his throat as the glow faded when he shifted his grip. Eamon's head tilted, as if listening to something beyond mortal hearing. Did you find the Chronicle of Azor Ahai, Samwell? I think so. Sam examined the book's spine, finding no title. The binding seems very old. Eamon nodded but said nothing of the light. Instead, he continued selecting volumes until Sam's arms were laden with knowledge centuries old. You'll depart on the morrow, Eamon said as they returned to the Solar. Lord Commander has arranged passage on a trading galley from Eastwatch. The Blackbird will take you that far. So soon. Fear clenched Sam's belly. He hadn't left the wall since taking his vows, had scarcely had time to consider what this journey might mean. The nights grow longer, Eamon said simply. We haven't the luxury of delay. That night, as Sam packed the precious texts along with his meager belongings, his hands trembled not just with fear, but with a strange anticipation. He lifted the ironwood-bound volume again, but the glow did not return. Had he imagined it? Some trick of the light, perhaps? Or his overwrought mind conjuring wonders where none existed? Morning came too soon. As the brothers gathered in the courtyard to see him off, Maester Eamon beckoned Sam close. Knowledge is a weapon, Samwell, the ancient maester whispered, his breath frosting in the bitter air. Learn to wield it well, and trust in what you feel, not just what you read. Sam mounted his Garen, adjusting his cloak against the biting wind. Castle Black's gate yawned before him, opening to a world he scarcely remembered. Sam felt something strange stirring beneath his fear. A pull, as if some unseen force tugged him southward. As if something waited for him at the Citadel, something beyond the knowledge he sought. Chapter 20, Steel and Sorcery. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. The seas near Sea Dragon Point. John clutched the ship's rail with white-knuckled hands, his stomach heaving with each swell of the sea. The salt-laden wind that had seemed so fresh and promising at Deepwood Mott now only intensified his misery, carrying the stench of fish and tar from the decks below. His chest burned with acid, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill air. They never said the sea was so merciless, he thought bitterly. But then, what did he know about the seas? Ghost pressed against his legs, the direwolf's massive frame uncharacteristically subdued. The beast's red eyes were half-lidded, his usual silent vigilance replaced by quiet suffering. Each time the ship rolled, Ghost would flatten his ears and press closer to John, as if seeking comfort from the one creature who shared his distress. Not enjoying our voyage, Ghost? John muttered through clenched teeth. Neither am I. The Northern Maid, a trading vessel, cut through another wave while sending spray across the bow. John's stomach lurched in protest, and he leaned farther over the rail, heaving up what little remained in his belly. Nothing came but bitter bile. I see you're becoming acquainted with the sailor's life. Master Luke's voice came from behind, infuriatingly steady and amused. John turned his head just enough to glare at his teacher. Luke stood with his feet planted shoulder-width apart, moving with the ship rather than against it. Even Ghost raised his head to regard the man with what John could only interpret as direwolf resentment. Is this? John swallowed hard against another wave of nausea. Part of my training too? Luke laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. In a manner of speaking. He moved beside John at the rail, his presence solid and untroubled by the ship's constant motion. The body's reaction to the sea is much like its reaction to fear or pain, something to be acknowledged, then controlled. Easy for you to say, John growled. You look like you were born on a ship. Hardly. I grew up surrounded by sand, not water. Luke's eyes crinkled at the corners. But the force flows through all things, John. The sea included. John groaned as another swell lifted the bow. Right now the only thing flowing through me is misery. Focus, Luke said, his voice shifting from casual to instructive. Close your eyes. If I close my eyes, it gets worse. Only because you're fighting the ship's motion instead of feeling it. Luke placed a hand on John's shoulder. The force connects you to everything around you. The wood beneath your feet, the water beneath the hull, the rhythm of the waves. John reluctantly closed his eyes, immediately regretting it as darkness amplified the nauseating roll of the deck. His fingers tightened on the rail until the wood creaked in protest. "Don't resist," Luke continued. "Feel the ship. Become part of its motion rather than its victim." "I'm trying," John snapped, then caught himself. Master Luke had taught him that anger led nowhere useful. He drew a deep breath, ignoring the salt sting in his nostrils. "I'm trying," he repeated calmer. "Do or do not," Luke replied with that cryptic half-smile that both infuriated and intrigued John. "There is no try." John swallowed his retort and focused inward, seeking that center of stillness Luke had been teaching him to find. The force was there, as always a current beneath the surface of his awareness, waiting to be channeled. He reached for it, letting his consciousness expand beyond the confines of his rebelling body. Slowly, the sensations changed. The ship's rise and fall became less an assault on his senses and more a pattern he could anticipate. The wooden deck creaked and groaned, but now John heard the rhythm in its complaints. A song of straining timber and stretched rope that told of the sea's movements before they happened. "Better?" Luke asked quietly. John opened his eyes, surprised to find his nausea had receded to a dull discomfort rather than the knife-edged misery of moments before. "Yes," he admitted, "though I still don't see why anyone chooses to live on water. Some men are drawn to what challenges them." Luke gazed out over the endless gray waves. "The Ironborn worship a sea god, don't they?" "The drowned god," John nodded. Theon spoke of him sometimes, though never when Lord Stark could hear. The mention of his father, his uncle, sent a fresh wave of confusion through John's mind. He was still sorting through what it meant to be Lynna's son rather than Ned's. Ghost stirred at his side, the direwolf's posture less hunched now. Through their bond, John sensed the creature's nausea easing as his own did. The wolf shook himself, water droplets flying from his thick white fur. "Your companion seems to be adapting," Luke observed. "He feels what I feel sometimes," John said. "Or I feel what he feels. The line blurs." "A natural force bond," Luke nodded. "Rare and valuable. Now," he straightened, gesturing toward the center of the deck. "Since you've found your sea legs, it's time we resumed your training." John grimaced. "Here? Now? Is there a better time?" Luke was already moving to a clear space where the mainmast cast its shadow. "The uneven footing will only enhance your balance and adaptability." With a sigh, John pushed away from the rail. The constant motion still bothered him, but with the force flowing through him, guiding his movements, he found he could walk with reasonable steadiness. Ghost followed, padding silently across the wooden planks with growing confidence. Luke drew 2 practice swords from a canvas bundle. Simple wooden wasters, weighted to mimic steel but harmless enough for shipboard training. He tossed one to John, who caught it by the hilt. John shifted his stance as Master Luke positioned himself in the center of the deck, wooden practice sword held loosely in his right hand. The ship rolled beneath them, but John found his balance now, the force guiding his movements as naturally as breathing. "Today," Luke said, "we begin something different, something that addresses what happened at Winterfell." John felt his jaw tighten. Since the revelation in the crypts, he'd felt a smoldering anger deep within. Even now, the memory of flames dancing between his fingers haunted him. "I lost control," John admitted. "Yes." Luke's eyes held no judgment. The dark side of the force responds to passion, to anger, fear, aggression. These emotions are natural, John. Denying them only gives them power. Several sailors went about their work, casting curious glances at the strange training session. John spotted Jory Castle leaning against the mainmast, arms crossed, his weathered face impassive. "In the Order," Luke continued, "there exists a fighting form called Vapad. I know only portions of it, learned from ancient texts. It was considered dangerous by the Jedi." "Dangerous how?" "It channels aggressive feelings rather than suppressing them." Luke raised his practice sword. "It walks the edge of darkness without falling in." John frowned. "You want me to use my anger?" "I want you to acknowledge it, control it, direct it." Luke's voice grew quiet. "The fire you summoned came from the same place as your rage. Understand one, and you begin to master the other." John raised his own practice sword, feeling the familiar weight. In his mind he saw fire, beautiful and terrible, springing from his fingertips. The memory brought a surge of power that both thrilled and frightened him. "Begin," Luke said. Their wooden blades clashed, but unlike their previous training in Sorisu, Luke's movements were aggressive, almost vicious. He pushed forward, striking in rapid succession, forcing Jon backward across the rolling deck. "Feel your anger," Luke instructed as he landed a stinging blow to Jon's ribs. "Don't suppress it. Don't indulge it. Channel it." Jon felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the same rage that had exploded when Lord Stark revealed the truth. Instead of pushing it down, he let it flow into his arms, his blade. He struck back, faster and harder than before. His practiced sword became a blur as he drove Luke backward, each swing carrying the weight of 15 years of lies. "Good," Luke said, parrying Jon's strikes. "But control it. Vapad isn't about losing yourself to rage. It's about riding its edge." Jon forced himself to breathe, to feel the anger without surrendering to it. His attacks became more precise, calculated. The force flowed through him differently now. Not the serene river of Sorisu, but a contained storm, directed and purposeful. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the crew had stopped working. Jory and the other Winterfell guards watched with undisguised astonishment. Harwin whispered something to Alan, whose hand drifted unconsciously toward his sword hilt. "They fear what they don't understand," Jon said between strikes. "Fear leads to anger," Luke replied, executing a sequence of cuts that forced Jon to backpedal. "Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Remember that, Jon Snow." The use of his chosen name, not demon, centered Jon. He blocked Luke's next strike and countered with a move that combined Vapad's aggression with Sorisu's defensive precision. Luke nodded approval. "Better. You're finding balance." They continued for what felt like hours, Luke introducing movements Jon had never imagined possible. The wooden practice swords cracked against each other, the sound echoing across the water. With each exchange, Jon felt something shifting inside him. Not a rejection of his anger, but an understanding of it. A harnessing. When they finally stopped, Jon's tunic clung to him with sweat despite the cool sea air. His arms trembled with exertion, but his mind felt clearer than it had since leaving Winterfell. "You learn quickly," Luke said, returning his practiced sword to the canvas bundle. "It feels." Jon searched for the right words. "Feels true. Like I'm not pretending the darkness isn't there." Luke's eyes crinkled. The greatest mistake the Jedi made was believing darkness could be eliminated rather than understood. He glanced over Jon's shoulder, his expression suddenly alert. "Something's wrong." Jon turned to follow Luke's gaze. The horizon appeared empty, just endless gray waves meeting gray sky. "What is it?" "Hostile intent." Luke closed his eyes briefly. "From behind us." Luke strode across the deck, his movements suddenly taut with purpose. "Captain," he called to the weathered man at the helm. "We may have trouble following us." The captain squinted at the empty horizon. "I see nothing, M-Lord." "Trust me," Luke said. "Have your men keep watch on our stern. We're being pursued." Jon felt it then, a distant ripple in the force, like a cold current beneath warmer waters. Ghost's ears pricked forward, the direwolf's massive head turning toward the ship's wake. "How can you be sure?" Jon asked quietly. Luke's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "The same way you knew that Wildling would attack before he moved." The captain hesitated only briefly before barking orders. "Tomard, to the crow's nest." Eyes sharp, a thin sailor scrambled up the rigging with practiced ease. Jory approached, hand resting on his sword hilt. "What manner of trouble?" "I don't know yet," Luke replied. "But it means us harm." Jon moved to the ship's stern, the wooden planks creaking beneath his boots. The sea stretched empty and gray behind them, waves cresting and falling in endless rhythm. Through the force, he extended his awareness, feeling for the disturbance Luke had sensed. There, at the edge of perception, a predatory intent that reminded Jon of Ghost stalking deer in the Wolfswood. But this was no hunt for food. This was something crueler, hungrier. "Sails!" came the cry from above. Two ships, bearing down fast from the southwest. The crew burst into activity. The captain shouted commands while sailors rushed to their stations. Jon narrowed his eyes, focusing on the distant specks that had appeared on the horizon. "Ironborn," Harwin spat, coming to stand beside Jon. "Those are longships. The cut of their sails is unmistakable." "Raiders," Alan added grimly, "far from their usual hunting grounds." Jory joined them, his weathered face grim. "They've been growing bolder in recent years, taking ships farther north than before." "How long?" Jon asked. "An hour, maybe less," Jory replied. They're built for speed, those ironborn ships. Lighter than our trading vessel. Luke appeared beside them, his expression calm despite the growing tension. Captain says we can't outrun them. Then we fight, Jon said, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. The ship transformed as it prepared for battle. Sailors armed themselves with whatever weapons were available, belaying pins, boat hooks, a few actual swords. The Winterfell guards donned mail and checked their blades. Jon felt the familiar pre-battle tension spreading through his body, a tightness in his chest, a hollowness in his gut, the metallic taste of fear on his tongue. Remember your training, Luke said quietly. Center yourself. The Force will guide your movements. Jon nodded, drawing a deep breath. He reached for that cool current of calm Luke had taught him to find even in chaos. Ghost pressed against his leg, the direwolf's presence steady and reassuring. What do they want? Jon asked. What Reavers always want, Harwin answered. Gold? Goods. Captives to sell as thralls. The longships drew closer, their black sails now clearly visible. Jon could make out the golden kraken of House Greyjoy on one, a grinning skull on the other. They cut through the water with frightening speed, oars rising and falling in perfect unison. They'll come alongside, Jory explained, adjusting his sword belt. Board us from both sides at once. That's their way. Luke surveyed the deck. We need to thin their numbers before they board. Captain, do you have archers? 2 men with hunting bows. Nothing more. It will have to do. Luke turned to Jon. Stay close to me. Watch my movements. Learn. Jon remembered the practice yard at Winterfell, how Luke had dispatched Jory and Alan with moves that seemed to defy possibility. Whatever happened next, he suspected, would make that display seem like children's play. The ironborn ships separated, one angling to approach their port side, the other to starboard. Jon could see men on their decks now, armored in salt-stained leather and dull mail, axes and swords glinting in the gray light. Steady, the captain called. Hold your positions. The first volley of arrows flew from the ironborn ships. Jon ducked instinctively, but Luke remained standing. His hand rose, and 3 arrows heading directly for them simply stopped in midair, hanging suspended before dropping harmlessly to the deck. 7 hells, Alan whispered. Before anyone could react further, the ironborn ships slammed against their hull. Grappling hooks flew over the railings, biting into wood. Rough voices shouted battle cries as the first wave of raiders scrambled up ropes and over the sides. Jon drew his sword, falling into the opening stance of Sorisu. Beside him, Ghost bared silent teeth, hackles raised along his spine. What is dead may never die. An ironborn raider leapt over the railing, battle-axe raised high. Jon felt the force flow through him, his body responding with a speed and precision that would have been impossible months ago. He stepped sideways, letting the axe whistle past his shoulder, then swept his blade across the man's unprotected side. The raider fell with a gurgle, blood spreading across the deck. The ship erupted into chaos. Raiders poured over both sides, met by the desperate defense of the crew and the more disciplined resistance of the Winterfell guards. Steel rang against steel. Men shouted in pain and fury. The deck grew slick with blood and seawater. Jon fought with cold precision, letting the force guide his movements. A second raider lunged at him with a spear. Jon parried the thrust, sliding inside the man's guard. His blade found the gap between the raider's helmet and mail shirt. The ironborn's eyes widened in surprise as his life fled. Ghost became a white blur of fury, leaping at a raider who had cornered one of the younger sailors. The direwolf's jaws closed around the man's throat, and they fell together in a spray of crimson. Amidala moved with lethal grace beside Ghost, her massive form dwarfing even the largest raiders. An ironborn sailor, his beard matted with salt spray and blood, raised a boarding pike toward the direwolf pair. The man never saw Amidala coming. Her jaws closed around his neck with a wet crunch that carried even over the clash of steel. She shook him once, violently, the way a terrier might shake a rat. Blood sprayed in an arc across the deck, spattering Ghost's white fur with crimson droplets. The raider's body went limp, his pike clattering uselessly against the rail as Amidala released him. He crumpled to the deck, eyes already glazing over. Through the melee, Jon caught glimpses of Luke. His master wasn't using his hidden lightsaber but fought with what appeared to be an ordinary sword. Yet there was nothing ordinary about how he wielded it. Luke moved like water given form, his blade finding every opening, every weakness. More remarkably, he was using the Force openly now, gesturing with his free hand to send raiders flying backward, turning their own weapons against them, deflecting arrows with mere thought. An Ironborn with a face crisscrossed by ritual scars charged Jon, whirling a flail above his head. Jon caught the chain on his blade, but the weapon wrapped around his sword. The raider grinned, jerking hard to disarm him. Jon released his sword and let the Force flow through him. As the raider lunged forward, Jon sidestepped, his hand shooting out to grasp the man's throat. With strength born of the Force, he lifted the struggling Ironborn and slammed him against the mainmast. The crack of breaking bone cut through the battle noise, and the raider slumped lifeless to the deck. Retrieving his sword, Jon turned to face new threats. 3 raiders had cornered Jory, who fought with his back to the ship's rail. Jon waded toward them, dispatching one with a thrust through the back before the other 2 realized he was there. Jory nodded his thanks, his face streaked with blood from a cut above his eye. "Behind you!" Jory shouted. Jon whirled to find the largest Ironborn he'd seen yet, a monster of a man with arms thick as small trees. The raider wielded a massive 2-handed axe, already red with the blood of his victims. Jon raised his sword, knowing it would likely shatter against such a weapon. The axe never fell. The raider's body suddenly contorted, his back arching unnaturally. He rose 6 feet into the air, limbs splayed wide, his face a mask of terror. Jon turned to see Luke standing with one hand extended, fingers curled as if grasping something invisible. With a flick of Luke's wrist, the raider flew across the deck and over the opposite rail, disappearing into the churning sea with a distant splash. The Ironborn nearest to Luke backed away, terror plain on their faces. One dropped his weapon. "Sorcery," he hissed. "He's a godless sorcerer." Luke stepped forward, and the deck beneath the raider's feet buckled upward, sending 3 of them sprawling. Before they could rise, invisible hands seemed to grasp them, dragging them across the planks and tossing them overboard like discarded toys. "Demon!" An Ironborn captain with a gold ring in his nose pointed at Luke. "Fall back! Back to the ships!" The remaining raiders scrambled to retreat, several leaping over the rails in their haste to escape. Luke watched them go, his expression calm but resolute. When one turned to loose a final arrow at a sailor's unprotected back, Luke's hand shot out. The arrow reversed course in midair, burying itself in the archer's chest. Jon stood amid the carnage, breathing hard. The battle had lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The deck was littered with bodies, most Ironborn but some of their own crew as well. Groans of the wounded mingled with the creak of timbers and the slap of waves against the hull. The raiders' retreat was as swift as their attack. The grappling hooks were cut loose, and the longships began to pull away, oars churning the water in desperate haste. Jon turned to Luke, who was helping a wounded sailor to his feet. The crew stood in a loose circle, staring at the Jedi with expressions ranging from awe to fear. Even Jory and the Winterfell guards, who had witnessed some of Luke's abilities before, seemed shaken by the full display of his power. "What manner of man are you?" the captain asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Luke met his gaze steadily. "Someone who protects those under his care," he said. Nothing more. But Jon knew better. He'd seen what Luke could do now, not just in controlled training but in the chaos of battle. The power to throw men about like straw dolls, to stop arrows in flight, to sense danger before it appeared. "The Ironborn will spread tales of this," Harwin said, wiping blood from a cut on his arm. "Tales of a sorcerer who defeated them with invisible hands." "Let them," Luke replied. "Perhaps it will make them think twice before attacking innocent ships." Jon cleaned his blade on a fallen raider's cloak, then sheathed it. 3 men dead by his hand, their blood staining the deck at his feet. He felt no satisfaction, only a hollow certainty that he'd done what was necessary. The Force had guided his blade, made him faster, stronger, more precise than any normal swordsman could be. He looked at his hands, remembering the heat of rage and fire at Winterfell. Today he channeled that power differently, controlled, directed, purposeful. Ghost padded to his side, muzzle dark with blood. The direwolf's red eyes met Jon's, and through their bond, Jon felt neither remorse nor pride, only the simple understanding that they had protected their pack. "Help the wounded," Luke called, breaking the spell that had fallen over the crew. "We need to secure the ship and tend to our own." As Jon moved to assist, he glanced back at the retreating Ironborn ships. They were already distant shapes on the horizon, fleeing the power they'd encountered. Theirs was a culture that respected strength above all, that took what they wanted from those too weak to resist. Today, they had learned there were forces in the world more powerful than their axes and their drowning god. And so had John.